Hello and welcome to the Mirrix Looms Friday video series. My name is Elena Zuyuk and today I'm going to talk about weaving beads on a Mirrix loom using the shedding device. Now we're going to go over everything from setup to warping to putting the heddles on the loom, but mostly we're going to focus on actually learning how to weave beads using the shedding device. So let's get started. So first I am going to briefly go over how to warp your loom for bead weaving with the shedding device. Now if you've never warped your loom before, go to our website and go to Learning Center and Warping Instructions, and you can get a step-by-step PDF document showing you exactly how to do this whole process. I'm going to go over it really fast, but that's the best way to really learn. Now the first thing we're going to do is make sure our loom is even. So you're going to want to measure on each side just to make sure everything is square. And then you're going to choose your spring. I'm going to be weaving with 8/0 beads, so I'm going to use my 10-dent spring right here. You can learn more on our website about how to figure out which spring to use for different kinds of beads. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just place my spring here in the tray on top of the loom. Then I'm going to take my clips and I'm going to put them backwards on the loom, just like this. Next, I will place my warping bar in between those wooden clips, and it's going to press together a little bit to hold it, so it just needs to be securely held right there. Then I'm going to take my warp thread. I'm using a Ceylon beading thread right here, and I am going to make a piece that's 8 dents wide. So I'm going to just do it on one side instead of in the middle to help balance the warping bar. If I just put it in the middle, then these sides of the warping bar would be wobbly. So I'm going to put it on one side and then I'm going to tie the other side up while I'm weaving, so that's balanced. Or you could put one piece on each side. And if you were doing a really wide piece, you could just go all the way across the loom and you wouldn't have that problem. So I am going to take my thread here and I'm just going to tie onto the warping bar. I'm just going to tie a knot, anything to kind of get it secured. And I'm going to start by going behind the loom. Now the one thing to remember when you're warping is that you never cross in the center of the loom. You're always going around it. So we're going to come from behind the loom to the front. We're going to choose our first dent, which is the space in the spring or the warp coil. We're going to come back down, and the other important thing to remember when warping is when you hit the warping bar, you're just going to go around the warping bar and do a figure 8 and come back to where you came from. So then we're going to come around, and because we're warping for bead weaving with the shedding device, we're going to put that thread in the same dent that we just put the other thread. So each dent is going to have 2 warp threads in it. So I'm going to continue doing this. I go right in the front of the loom, around the back, and when I hit the warping bar, I just go around that warping bar and come back where I came from. Now I'm going to go around the bottom of the loom, right back up, and now because I already have 2 warps in that dent, I'm going to go here to my next dent. Go around the loom, hit the warping bar, come back in the direction I came from. And then I'm going to go into that same dent again. And I see here that I skipped a dent. So I'm just going to bring those right over there. So you just keep watching as you weave to make sure you're not making any mistakes, because it's way better to catch a mistake right now while you're warping than after you've already warped. So we continue doing this, making sure that we're really keeping our warps organized. If you have a bottom spring kit, you would be doing the exact same thing in the bottom spring like you're doing in the top spring. So here I hit my warping bar, I come back down, and I may want to check, put my hands in the middle here to see that I haven't accidentally crossed over. Come back over, just like this. Back around, and again, as I said, you can look online for more detailed instructions on how to do this. Now here is a close-up of the warp coil, or the spring. So you can see that I've put 2 warp threads in each dent here. And I'm coming up the loom, still warping, and I'm just going to place this in my next dent over. I'm going to go around. When I hit the warping bar down here, I'm just going to loop around that and come back in the direction that I just came in. And then I'm going to put this into the same dent. So there are 2 warp threads in each dent. That's the big thing that you have to remember when warping for bead weaving. So I'm continuing to warp around the warping bar, around the front of the loom. When I come back here, again, next dent over, around. When I hit the warping bar, come back from the direction I came and put that second warp thread in that dent. So I'm just going to finish warping here. I'm going to warp 8 dents across. Now, when you've gotten as far as you want to warp across, you're just going to tie that off onto the warping bar. So I'm going to cut off a length right here. And I'm just going to tie a knot here, right here onto the warping bar. Now you want to make sure that you're keeping an even tension here. You don't want this to be really loose, because even if it's not tight, it needs to be even. So there we go. And then I'm just going to go and organize my warp threads a little bit. Make sure everything is correct, that I didn't make any mistakes, because now is the time to know. Now, one thing that I'm going to do if I do not have a bottom spring kit, which I don't on this loom, is I'm going to isolate the pairs of warp threads here at the bottom of the loom. And the easiest way to do that is to go to the top of the loom and see where you have your pairs, and your pairs there are going to be 2 in each dent, and just weave through those pairs. So go over, under, over, under. And the reason we're going to do this is because your first row is woven in the traditional method, and you want to make sure that you know which threads go together in the top here, which is easy to see if you do have the bottom spring kit, but if you don't, you're going to want to see that, because you're going to treat each pair as one warp for that first row. So I'm just going to now weave back. And then what I'm going to do when I'm finished with this is I'm just going to bring this down to the bottom. And that will help me with my first row. So I have them all separated, and I'm just going to tie, well, I'll bring this down. And I'm just going to tie this off, and so we'll use that just to help us out in the future. Now we are going to release our clips right here. We're going to bring our warping bar down to the bottom of the loom. See our little pear thing. Probably should have done this after I move my warping bar down. I'm going to move that down. Now you can see that it's uneven. That's what I was referring to before. So all I do here is I'm just going to tie some kind of ribbon or string or cord to the other side to balance the warping bar. And then I'm going to tighten the tension by moving my wing nuts to tighten it. So now we've tied on this ribbon to even our warping bar here, and we've tightened our tension. So you can see it's pretty tight. We could even make it a little tighter. So this is how you do that. It's just turning these wing nuts like that, making sure it's even. And then you're going to want to measure to make sure it really is even. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to start putting the heddles on. We're going to take these wooden clips and we're going to just flip them forward. Make sure they're even there. And then we're going to take our shedding device here. Now there's a hole in the shedding device. If you're left-handed, you're going to want to put that on the left-hand side. If you're right-handed, you're going to want to put that on your right side. So we'll put that in. And we're going to get our heddles. Here are my heddles. These are our Teslov heddles that we sell on our website, but you can also make your own. We have instructions on how to do that on the website. Now what you're going to do is you're going to unscrew this bar here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a heddle on one of the warp threads in each dent. And again, we have lots of information on how to do this in a little bit more detail. I'm gonna go through this pretty fast. So we're gonna start on this top side and put heddles on one thread in every dent. So now that I've finished putting my heddles on here, I'm just going to slip that bar back. I'm going to screw this. You should use your Allen wrench to do that really tightly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip the shedding device over. So those heddles that I just put on are on the bottom. And I'm going to do the same thing here on the top. Now what is important to do is to, first of all, be incredibly careful when you do this. But you want to look and see that, okay, here is the warp thread that I put my first heddle on. So I am going to make sure I am bringing my second warp thread to the right of that first warp thread when I put my heddle on. And I'm going to do that throughout the second set of the heddling process. So I want to look, okay, here's my second one, here is my warp thread. I'm going to bring, with the heddle on it, this one I'm bringing to the right of the warp thread that already has the heddle on it. Now the reason that you need to do this is because that will prevent your warp threads from getting crossed. So you're going to lift up. You don't want there to be any crossing there. So I'm going to continue to do this, and then we'll be all done with our heddles. Now I've finished putting on my second set of heddles. Now people ask, what are some tips and tricks to putting on heddles? It can be difficult to see. It can be hard, especially with a really wide piece. There are different things you could do. You could weave something in between the heddles that the warp threads that you already have heddles on. You can use something like a crochet hook to pick up your threads that you need to put heddles on. But the most important thing is to really do this slowly and carefully, and to try not to make a mistake at the beginning, because it's going to make things a lot harder if you make a mistake when you're putting the heddles on. So I'm all finished. I've put my bar back, and now I just want to check. So I'm just going to turn the shedding device here. I'm going to look. It looks like I have a good shed in that direction. Now I'm going to turn it the other way. Looks like I have a good shed in the other direction. So it looks like I did everything correctly. So now I'm just going to put my little handle on here. Screw on that back part. Also going to push these to keep the shedding device on. So now we are going to weave in our first row, and we're going to use the traditional method of weaving beads, treating each pair of beads as a warp thread, which is where this little string that we tied at the bottom or a bottom spring kit would help. So first thing I'm going to do is just tie onto the bar here. We're going to sew this back in eventually, but this will just help us to get started. So put that on. Then we're going to pick up one fewer beads than how many warp threads, or pairs of warp threads in this case, we have across. So I'm going to get 7 beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now the reason we weave one row like this is to prevent your beads from falling through. So then I'm just going to place my beads right behind my pairs, just like that. So there is a pair in between each bead, and I'm going to sew through on the front. So there's our first little row, and then we can cut this off the bottom whenever we want to. So now we're going to start weaving using the shedding device. So now to explain a little bit about weaving beads with a shedding device. What the shedding device does is it uses the heddles to attach this device right here to the warp threads. When you move the shedding device in one direction with this handle, it lifts up half of your warp threads. And when you move it the other way, up here, then it moves your warp threads in the other direction. Lifts the other half of those warp threads. So we're going to start in one position. It doesn't matter where you start. So now that we have our shedding device in one position, we're going to pick up 7 beads again, and we're just going to bring our thread right through the raised and lowered warp threads. And we're just going to take those and we're going to push them down, and they're going to fit into those little spaces. So then we just move that, and there they are. So then we're going to take our shedding device and we're going to move it into the other position. And what that's going to do is that's going to move your warp thread, so it's going to secure those threads around the thread that your beads are on. And so then we're going to pick up 7 more beads. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to do the same thing going in the other direction. So this is kind of like fiber weaving, but with beads, because you're going from left to right and then right to left. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to hold our beads up here. We're going to push them down, and they're going to fit right there into that space. So then we're going to pull through, and that's that. Now, to just be clear about how we really change the shed, you have this handle here, and it tucks behind the bar in one shed. Then you bring it up, and as you bring it up, you turn it so it can tuck behind the other bar, and that's the other shed. So you just move like this. You can also attach a Mirrix treadle to your loom to do this with your feet, and a lot faster. So that's how that works. So I'm just going to continue showing you how to do this. Here, again, we have our beads. We're going to place them up high. We're going to push them down, and they fit right there into those little spaces. Now, this is obviously a lot harder when you have a very wide piece, or if you have really small beads. And if you did have a wide piece, you could do something like, as you were putting it in, instead of putting all your beads in at a time, let's say I want to get those 3 beads in, and then I can just pull out a little piece to give me some leverage, and I can then put these 4 beads in. And then I could keep going along my wide piece and put 4 more beads in, or 5 more beads in. So you just want to make sure that they all fit in there securely. They're in the right place. And you have to remember to change that shed every time to keep those beads secured in there. And you'll know, say I just changed the shed, and so I can't really lift these up because they're secured. If I hadn't, then I would have been able to lift them right up. So I'm just going to do a few more rows to show you just a little bit more how it works. So I'm just going to continue weaving. I have changed my shedding device. Here we have my beads. Oops. You can see how it can get. It's not perfect every time, but once you get good at placing the beads in the right place, it becomes a lot easier. So you just place those in, and then you're going to change your shedding device the other direction. And you're going to pick up 7 more beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you're just going to come in from the other side. So you can either put them down on the needle or on the thread. Either way works. And there you go. And you can see how fast this is. So it takes a little longer to put on the heddles, but once you get the hang of it, you really breeze by. And that's that. That is how you weave beads with a shedding device. Thanks for watching.